This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. Any resemblance to real persons or actual events is coincidental. Adrian Vale leaned into the microphone at his own engagement gala and said it loud enough for 300 people to hear. She came from nothing. I gave her everything. And now she wants to negotiate. The ballroom didn't gasp, it froze. Elena Marlowe stood 6 feet in a dress that cost more than her first apartment, holding a champagne flute she hadn't touched, listening to the man she was supposed to marry reduce her entire existence to a transaction. In front of his business partners, his social circle, his father, she set the glass down on the nearest table, reached up, slid the engagement ring off her finger, and placed it on the white linen tablecloth, like she was returning something that had never belonged to her. I refuse to marry a man I can't trust. 300 people heard it. Not one of them moved. If this story already has you asking what you would do in her place, you're not alone. Hit subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about that night happened without a reason. The engagement party had been Adrian Vale's idea from the start. Not a dinner, not a quiet announcement, a gala 400 invitations, a ballroom at the Meridian Hotel on 54th Street, a string quartet, and a guest list that read like a directory of Manhattan's financial upper crust. Adrian had handed Elena the event planner's contact information 3 weeks earlier and told her to make whatever decision she wanted about the flowers and the menu. He did not consult her about the speech he planned to give. He did not mention the press release that went out that afternoon. The one that described Elena as a remarkable woman who has been instrumental in the Vale family's personal vision for the company's future expansion language she had never approved, attached to her name without her knowledge, distributed to every financial news outlet in the city. Elena found out about it 40 minutes before the event, sitting in the back of a car, checking her phone while the driver navigated midtown traffic. She read twice. Then she put her phone in her clutch and stared out the window for the rest of the ride and said nothing. Because she had learned, over 14 months with Adrian Vale, that saying something in the wrong moment only gave him more material to work with. She would wait, she would think. She would choose her moment. That was the version of herself she had become: calculated, careful, always 3 moves ahead, always managing the emotional temperature of a man who wore charm like a tailored suit and used it the same way, to impress, to control, to signal status. Elena Marlowe had grown up in a middle-class family in Queens. Her father was a retired electrician. Her mother taught 4th grade. She had put herself through Columbia on scholarships and part-time work, finished her MBA with honors, and spent 7 years building a genuinely respected name in corporate consulting before she ever walked into a room where Adrian Vale was standing. She was not naive. She had never been naive. That was the part that made the last 14 months so hard to explain, even to herself. She had seen the signs. The way Adrian interrupted her in front of colleagues, and then later insisted he'd only been clarifying. The way he expressed concern about her friendships with certain people, her friend Diane, specifically, who he called a bad influence without ever specifying what that meant. The way he would withdraw affection when Elena pushed back on something, then return with such warmth and attention that she found herself wondering if she'd imagined the original withdrawal. She had not imagined it. She knew that now. But knowing something and acting on it are 2 different skills, and Elena had spent too long telling herself the relationship was complicated rather than damaged, different rather than wrong, worth fixing rather than worth leaving. The press release changed something. It wasn't the worst thing Adrian had done. It wasn't even close. But it was the first time he had used her name, her actual professional reputation, the thing she had built independently, that existed before him and would need to exist after him as a tool for his own agenda. That was a line she hadn't known she was holding until he crossed it. The car stopped. The driver opened her door. Elena stepped out onto 54th Street, straightened her dress, and walked into the Meridian Hotel like a woman who had already made her decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. She didn't know yet that the moment would come sooner than she planned. The ballroom was everything Adrian had designed it to be: warm, expensive, humming with the low-level electricity of people who knew exactly what their net worth was and arranged themselves accordingly. Elena moved through the room with practiced ease, greeting people she recognized, deflecting questions about the wedding timeline with the same 2 or 3 lines she'd been using for months. September. Probably upstate. Still working out the details. The details were not being worked out. There were no details. Adrian had hired a wedding coordinator whom Elena had met exactly once, in a meeting where the coordinator spent 45 minutes presenting options that Elena had not been asked about beforehand, and which Adrian approved or rejected without looking at his fiancée. That meeting had been 6 weeks ago. Elena had not followed up. She spotted Nathaniel Vale across the room and felt the subtle shift that always happened when she saw him. Not attraction, not then, but something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. The sense of encountering someone who was actually present in a way that his son, for all his performance of presence, fundamentally was not. Nathaniel was 61 years old and looked exactly like what he was, a man who had spent 4 decades in rooms where enormous decisions were made and had learned to occupy space without announcing it. He was taller than Adrian. Quieter. The lines on his face were not decorative. He was not interested in being charming. He nodded when he saw Elena. She nodded back. They had spoken perhaps a dozen times in 14 months, rarely alone, always briefly, always with the particular careful courtesy of people who recognized something in each other and had mutually, wordlessly, decided not to examine what it was. Adrian appeared at Elena's shoulder and kissed her cheek. "You look incredible," he said. "Thank you. You see the turnout? Half the board is here." Chambers from Whitmore Capital flew in from London. "Adrian." She kept her voice low level. "We need to talk about the press release." He blinked. For exactly 1 second, something moved across his face that was not quite guilt but was adjacent to it. Then it was gone. Later he said, "Tonight isn't the time. You used my name without asking me. I used your name because you're going to be my wife, Elena. That's not misappropriation. That's not what this is about." She held his gaze. "I haven't agreed to be connected to the Whitmore acquisition. I don't even know enough about the Whitmore acquisition to have agreed. And now my name is in a press release describing me as instrumental in a deal I know nothing about." Adrian's jaw tightened. The charm didn't leave his face, it was too practiced for that, but something behind his eyes went flat. "We'll discuss it later. Adrian, Elena." And there it was, that particular quality of his voice, one that was never loud, never obviously threatening, but carried the distinct weight of a door closing. Later she let it go. She turned back to the room. She accepted a glass of champagne she didn't drink and spent the next hour and 15 minutes being Adrian Vale's fiancée, which was a performance she had gotten very good at without ever meaning to. Then the speeches started. Marcus Webb, Adrian's oldest friend and the Vale Company's head of external affairs, spoke first. He was warm and funny and said several genuinely nice things about Elena, which she appreciated because Marcus was one of the few people in Adrian's orbit who treated her like an actual person rather than an accessory. Then Adrian's uncle spoke. Then a colleague from the company's London office. Then Adrian took the microphone. He started well. He told a story about the first time he saw Elena at a conference accurate, mostly, though he embellished the details in ways that subtly repositioned him as the central figure in a story that had actually been mutual. He talked about being certain from the beginning, which was not how Elena remembered it, but was the kind of thing people said at engagements. He talked about the future, stood beside him, and smiled and looked at the man she was engaged to and tried one more time to find the version of him she had said yes to. Then he said it. It came near the end, and it came out of nowhere, or it felt that way, though later Elena would wonder if the entire speech had been building toward it all along. "People have asked me," Adrian said, his voice easy, almost amused, "what I see in a woman who came from a very different world than the one we're standing in right now." He smiled. A light self-deprecating smile. "And I'll be honest, early on, even some people I respect wondered if Elena was more interested in the Vale name than in me personally." The room had gone a degree quieter. "I'll tell you what I told them," Adrian continued. "I gave her everything she needed to walk away and still be comfortable. And she stayed. That tells me what I need to know." Elena heard the words. She processed them. She understood with a clarity that was almost physical what he had just done. He had stood in front of 300 people and reframed their entire relationship, as a loyalty test she had tossed past, a test she hadn't known she was being given, administered by a man who had decided that her staying was proof she was trustworthy and who apparently believed this was a romantic thing to say out loud. He had implied, gently but unmistakably, that the question of whether she was a gold digger had been live enough to discuss with people he respected. At her own engagement party, into a microphone, while she stood beside him. She heard someone in the room shift. She heard the almost imperceptible change in the ambient sound of 300 people processing something that hadn't landed right. She looked at her hand, she looked at the ring, she thought about the press release. She thought about the Whitmore acquisition and her name attached to something she didn't understand. She thought about 6 weeks of a wedding coordinator making decisions she'd never been consulted about. She thought about Diane, who Elena hadn't had dinner with in 3 months because Adrian kept finding reasons it wasn't a good time. She thought about 14 months of carefully managing a man who had the resources and the social architecture to make her disappear professionally if she handled this wrong. She thought, I have already been disappearing. She reached up, slid the ring off, set it on the nearest table. I refuse to marry a man I can't trust. The string quartet had stopped. She didn't know when. The room was completely silent in the specific way that only happens when something real has just occurred in a space designed for performance. Adrian's face went through several things very quickly. Shock, fury. Then, underneath both, something that looked almost like calculation, as if some part of him was already figuring out how to manage this. Elena, his voice was quiet, controlled. The door-closing voice. You're upset. I'm clear, she said. That's different. Put the ring back on. No. Elena, you told 300 people you tested me. Her voice was steady. She hadn't planned this speech. She hadn't planned any of it. She was operating on something deeper than planning the accumulated weight of 14 months finally hitting the floor. You stood here, in front of everyone you know, and congratulated yourself for deciding I wasn't after your money. And you thought that was a love story. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. Word for word. You gave me everything I needed to walk away and still be comfortable. Those were your words, Adrian. You were testing me. You've been testing me. And you still think the fact that I stayed is proof of something good about me, instead of proof that you've spent over a year treating your fiancé like a risk to be managed. Someone in the crowd coughed. Someone else shifted their weight. 300 people were holding themselves very still. Adrian stepped closer, still quiet, still controlled. But his eyes had gone somewhere cold. You're making a scene. You made the scene. I'm just not pretending it didn't happen. Put the ring on. We will talk about this privately. We've talked privately for 14 months. Nothing changes when we talk privately. You want to do this here? And for just a moment, the controlled exterior cracked, and she heard the real thing underneath, not anger exactly, but the particular fury of a man who had decided that his authority was not being respected, and who found this genuinely incomprehensible. In front of the board, in front of Chambers, you made Chambers relevant when you put my name in that press release. A sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp, something quieter than that, more like the collective sound of comprehension. Adrian's head turned slightly. His eyes cut across the room and found Marcus Webb, and the look that passed between them was brief but visible, and Elena saw it and understood it. This was not the first time Marcus had seen Adrian surprised by the consequences of his own decisions. Then another voice entered the room, calm, unhurried, coming from somewhere to Elena's left. Adrian. Nathaniel Vale walked forward from wherever he'd been standing, not rushing, not performing, just moving through the room with the particular deliberateness of a man who had learned that speed rarely improved anything. He stopped about 10 feet from his son. Tell her about the Whitmore acquisition, Nathaniel said. All of it. Adrian's face changed. Dad, this isn't... Tell her, or I will. The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. Adrian's jaw worked. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely unprepared. Nathaniel looked at Elena. Your name is on more than a press release, he said. Adrian structured a portion of the Whitmore acquisition using your professional credentials as part of the licensing framework. It's buried in the 4th addendum of the acquisition agreement. If the deal goes sideways and it's closer to sideways, then he's told anyone your name is attached to the liability. Elena heard the words. She heard them individually, one by one, her brain processing them with the particular slow clarity of someone encountering information that is simultaneously shocking and at some level not entirely surprising. Her professional credentials. Her name. On a liability she had never agreed to carry. Adrian started talking quickly, the controlled voice gone, something louder and less composed replacing it, something that sounded a great deal like a man who had been caught and was trying to reframe the catching as a misunderstanding. Elena wasn't listening. She was looking at Nathaniel Vale. He was watching her, not with pity, not with satisfaction. Just watching, with the steady attention of someone who had said the thing he needed to say and was now prepared to stand by it regardless of what it cost him. "How long have you known?" she asked him. 3 days, he said. "I found it during the routine audit. I told him he had 48 hours to tell you himself." He paused. "He didn't, Dad." Adrian's voice had dropped back to quiet, but this was a different quiet jagged underneath, the quiet of genuine anger. "You just blew up your son's engagement in front of his entire board of directors." "No," Nathaniel said, "you did that 3 days ago." Elena picked up her clutch from the table. Her hands were steady. She was aware of 300 people watching her, and she made a deliberate choice to care less about that than about putting one foot in front of the other. "I'm going to need a copy of that acquisition agreement," she said to Nathaniel. "I'll have it sent to you tonight. Thank you." She looked at Adrian. He was still standing at the podium, microphone in hand, surrounded by the wreckage of an evening that had been engineered to be perfect and had turned into something she suspected he would be unable to manage the narrative around, no matter how hard he tried. He looked at her with something on his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not the cold calculation she'd grown accustomed to. Something that looked almost like fear. Good, she thought. That's real. That's the first real thing you've shown me all night. She walked toward the exit. She did not run. She did not cry. She moved through the parting crowd at her own pace, and the only thought in her head was this. She had known for longer than she wanted to admit that this was coming. She had just been waiting to find out who she would be when it finally arrived. Turns out she was someone who could walk out of a room with 300 witnesses and feel, underneath the fear and the legal exposure and the logistical disaster of an unwound engagement, something she hadn't felt in 14 months. Relief. It hit her in the elevator, alone, descending from the 40th floor of the Meridian Hotel. Not triumph, not devastation, just the specific unfamiliar lightness of a weight she had been carrying for so long she'd stopped noticing it was there. She had stopped noticing a lot of things. The elevator opened. She walked through the lobby. The doorman held the door. She stepped out onto 54th Street, and the night air hit her, and she pulled out her phone and called her friend Diane, who picked up on the second ring. "Hey," Diane said, "how's the party?" "I need somewhere to stay tonight," Elena said. A beat of silence. "Okay," Diane said. "Do I need to ask questions?" "Not tonight." "Are you safe?" "Yes, I'm making up the couch." "Thank you." Elena flagged a cab. She got in. She gave Diane's address, and as the cab moved through midtown traffic, she opened her email and found, already waiting, a forwarded document from an address she didn't recognize Nathaniel's private server. She would later learn. The acquisition agreement. All 4 addenda. She started reading. By the time the cab reached the Upper West Side, she had found the clause Nathaniel had described. Her name, her credentials, her professional history, repurposed without her consent into a licensing framework, designed to give a complicated acquisition the appearance of legitimacy it may not have actually possessed. If the Whitmore deal fell apart, and reading between the lines of the 4th addendum, she could see several ways it might, she would not just lose the relationship. She would spend the next 3 years fighting to keep her career. Adrian had known this. He had known it, and he had let her walk into that party, stand beside him at that Fotzim, smile through that speech, while carrying liability she hadn't agreed to and hadn't been told about. She put her phone in her bag. She pressed her forehead against the cool window and let the cab carry her through the city she had built her life in. And she thought about all the ways she had been careful, and all the ways careful hadn't been enough. And she thought about the moment when Nathaniel Vale had walked across that ballroom and opened his mouth and said the thing his son had decided not to say. He had destroyed his son's engagement, in public, in front of the board. He had done it because the alternative was letting her walk into a legal trap with her eyes closed. She didn't know yet what to do with that. She didn't know what she thought about Nathaniel Vale or what his motives were, or whether she was capable of trusting any of her own instincts right now, given what 14 months of suppressing them had done to her judgment. But she knew what he had done, and she knew what it had cost him. And somewhere underneath the fear and the exhaustion and the dawning awareness of how much work tomorrow was going to require, she filed that away, not as gratitude, not as anything she owed him, but as a data point. A single, specific, observable fact about a man whose actions, for once, matched the thing he was claiming to be. The cab stopped. She paid. She got out. She rang Diane's buzzer, and when the door opened, Diane took one look at her and pulled her inside without a word. And for the first time all night, Elena Marlowe's composure slipped, not collapsed, not shattered, just slipped the way a held breath finally releases. And she sat down on Diane's couch and let herself feel exactly as scared as she actually was. Not ashamed, not defeated, just scared, which was honest, and honest was somewhere to start. This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. Elena didn't sleep. She tried. She lay on Diane's couch under a blanket that smelled like lavender detergent and stared at the ceiling and listened to the city do what the city always did at 2 a.m. sirens 3 blocks away. A cab horn, someone's music bleeding through the floor from the apartment below, and she ran the numbers in her head the way she always ran numbers when she was scared, because numbers were honest, and numbers didn't move the goalposts. The Whitmore acquisition was valued at $430 million. The fourth addendum listed her as a licensed consultant of record on the regulatory framework technodectant that, under New York State financial compliance law, carried joint liability in the event of material misrepresentation. She was not a lawyer, but she had spent 7 years in corporate consulting, and she knew what material misrepresentation looked like, and what she had read in the back of that cab looked like it very, very carefully. She picked up her phone at 3 a.m. and called her attorney. Not a family friend, not someone Adrian had introduced her to. Her own attorney, Carol Brandt, who had represented Elena since her second year of consulting, and who answered the phone on the fourth ring with the flat, fully awake voice of a woman who had been in this profession long enough that 3 a.m. calls no longer surprised her. "Tell me," Carol said. Elena told her all of it. The press release, the addendum, the clause, the fact that she had never signed anything, never been consulted, never been present in any meeting where her name or credentials were discussed in connection with Whitmore. Carol was quiet for a long moment. "Forward me the document tonight," she said. "Already done. How are you?" "I'm functional." "That's not what I asked." Elena looked at the ceiling. "I'm scared," she said. "But I'm thinking clearly." "Good. Don't talk to Adrian. Don't talk to the company's legal team. Don't respond to anything in writing without running it by me first." "What's my exposure?" "I don't know yet." "Significant, potentially, if the acquisition triggers an investigation. But the fact that you never signed anything and can demonstrate you had no actual involvement that matters. It won't be nothing, but it won't be career-ending if we move fast." "He did this on purpose," Elena said. It wasn't a question. Carol didn't answer right away. "I'll know more once I read the document." "Get some sleep." "I'll try." She didn't. By 6 a.m, she was sitting at Diane's kitchen table with a cup of coffee she'd made herself and her laptop open to every piece of professional documentation she'd produced in the last 2 years, cross-referencing dates against anything that could be connected to Whitmore. Diane appeared in the doorway at 6:30 in her robe, looked at the table, looked at Elena, and went to make more coffee without saying anything. That was why Elena had called Diane and not anyone else. Diane knew when talking helped and when it didn't. "He's called 4 times, Elena said, without looking up from the screen. "Adrian? Yes. You're not going to answer." "No." Diane set a fresh cup beside her. "What do you need?" "I need to know if I can stay here for a few days. Just until I figure out where I'm going. You can stay here as long as you want. I'll pay rent." "Elena, I need to pay rent," Elena said. "I need to not owe anyone anything right now. Do you understand?" Diane was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "I understand." The text from Adrian started at 7:15. The first one said, "We need to talk." "Please." The second one said, "I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But there are things about the Whitmore situation you don't understand." The third one said, "My father doesn't have the full picture. He never does. Please don't make a permanent decision based on one conversation. The fourth one said, Elena, please. She read all four and set her phone face down on the table. She thought about the word please. She thought about how many times she had heard Adrian Vale say please and how rarely it had meant what the word was supposed to mean. With Adrian, please was less a request and more a signal, the sound of a man who had decided he was entitled to something and was now informing you of that entitlement in the gentlest available language. She turned her phone face up and typed one sentence back. Have your legal team contact Carol Brandt. Then she put the phone away and went back to the documentation. Carol called at 9:40. I've read it, she said. And it's not accidental. The language is too specific, the placement too deliberate. Someone drafted this with your credentials in mind from the beginning. This didn't happen at the last minute. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. He planned it. I can't say that definitively without discovery. What I can say is that this wasn't a mistake. Carol paused. I want you to do something for me today. I want you to write down every meeting, every conversation, every document you were shown in the last 6 months related to Whitmore in any way, even tangentially. Dates, locations, who was present, what was said, everything you remember. Don't interpret it, just record it. Okay. And Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Go ahead. Did Nathaniel Vale come to you with this information, or did you go to him? Elena thought back to the ballroom, to Nathaniel moving across the room without being rushed, to the way he'd said Adrian's name not like a challenge, but like a line being drawn. He came to me, she said, in public, in front of everyone. Another pause. That's interesting. What does it mean? I don't know yet, Carol said. It might mean he's a decent man who did the right thing. It might mean he has his own reasons for wanting the Whitmore deal disrupted. It might mean both. Don't assume it was purely on your behalf. I'm not assuming anything. Good. That's the right answer. Elena spent the rest of the morning writing the timeline Carol had asked for. It took 4 hours. She filled 11 pages of a yellow legal pad in her own handwriting, because typing felt too permanent, and she needed to be able to cross things out, and she crossed out a lot. What emerged from those 11 pages was not a conspiracy. It was worse than a conspiracy. It was a pattern, quiet, incremental, consistent. The way Adrian had gradually shifted certain conversations into settings where Elena was present but peripheral. The way he'd introduced her to specific members of the Whitmore team in ways that now read as strategic rather than social. The way he'd mentioned her consulting background to the company's regulatory affairs director at a dinner 3 months ago, a comment Elena had registered as a compliment and was now rereading as a setup. She had been in the room. She just hadn't known what room it was. She set the legal pad down and pressed her palms flat on the table and breathed. Diane appeared in the doorway again. Someone's here. Elena looked up. Nathaniel Vale, Diane said, in the tone of a woman carefully withholding her opinion of this development. He's downstairs. He didn't call ahead. Elena was quiet for a moment. Send him up, she said. Diane's expression shifted slightly. You sure? No, Elena said. Send him up. He looked different in the daylight and in civilian clothes, a dark gray jacket, no tie, the kind of effortless, understated dressing that came from decades of not needing to impress anyone. He looked tired. Not exhausted, just tired, the way a man looks when he's been up since 4 a.m. managing something he didn't choose to create. He stood in Diane's small living room and looked around it with the brief, unperforming observation of someone genuinely registering his surroundings rather than performing comfort. I should have called, he said. Yes, Elena agreed. May I sit? She gestured at the chair across from the couch. He sat. She sat on the couch and pulled her knees slightly to the side and kept the legal pad on the cushion next to her. How bad is it? He asked. No preamble. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry about last night. Just the question that mattered, asked directly, as if he had decided that anything else would be an insult to her intelligence. She found unexpectedly that she appreciated it. My attorney is still assessing, she said. But preliminary read is that the exposure is real and the placement wasn't accidental. He nodded. He looked at the table. I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without deciding what it means before I finish. I'll try. I've known about the Whitmore acquisition's structural problems for 2 months, he said. Not the addendum specifically. I didn't find the addendum until 3 days ago. But I knew the deal was built on projections that didn't hold up to scrutiny, and that Adrian had been managing the board's access to certain financial data in ways that weren't standard practice. Elena watched him. I confronted him 6 weeks ago, Nathaniel continued. He told me he had it handled. I believed him. Or I wanted to believe him, which isn't the same thing, but I told myself it was at the time. He paused. When I found your name in the fourth addendum, I realized that I had been wrong to wait. And I realized that waiting had not just let the problem continue, it had let you become part of it without your knowledge. So the board doesn't know about the structural issues. The board knows what Adrian has chosen to show them, which means they don't know. Correct. Elena pressed her thumb against the edge of the legal pad. Why are you here, Nathaniel, specifically? Because my attorney told me this morning not to assume your motives were purely on my behalf, and she's a smart woman, and I'm inclined to take her advice. He looked at her without flinching. Your attorney is right to tell you that. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's not. He was quiet for a moment, not performing thought, actually thinking. She could tell the difference. I'm here because I know what's about to happen. When the acquisition irregularities surface, and they will surface, the timeline is days, not weeks. The investigators are going to work outward from the financial structure, and your name is going to appear before your attorney has had time to build a full defensive record. You're telling me to move faster. I'm telling you the window is shorter than you think. And what do you get out of this? He looked at her steadily. The company I spent 40 years building doesn't become the vehicle for my son's fraud, he said. That's what I get. Elena searched his face. He let her. He didn't arrange his expression or add anything to soften what he'd said or perform humility. He just sat there and let her look at him with all her skepticism fully operational, and didn't seem to find that offensive. Your son called me 4 times this morning, she said. I know. He texted that you don't have the full picture. Something moved across Nathaniel's face. It wasn't quite contempt. It was the expression of a man who has heard a particular argument so many times that it no longer produces anger, just a kind of weary clarity. Adrian has been telling me I don't have the full picture since he was 26 years old, he said. Usually right before the full picture becomes unavoidable. Is that what happened with his marriage? The question surprised him. She saw a brief, genuine flicker of surprise that he didn't try to hide. You know about that, he told me, or a version of it. What version did he tell you? That it ended because he was too focused on work, and she felt neglected. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. That's partly true, he said finally. It's also partly the most charitable possible interpretation of what actually happened. Which was, she found out he'd been using a joint account she didn't know about to fund a private investment that was in her name without her knowledge. He paused. She left within 48 hours of finding out. Elena heard this. She heard the symmetry of it. He's done this before, she said. He learned something from watching me build the company, Nathaniel said. He learned that information is leverage, and that the person who controls information controls the situation. He just applied that lesson to his personal life in ways I never intended, and never he stopped. I spent a long time telling myself it wasn't my fault. It wasn't entirely. But I taught him that control was how you protected what mattered. I didn't teach him the difference between protecting something and owning it. The room was quiet. Diane was somewhere in the back of the apartment, deliberately and audibly making herself up. I need to ask you something, Elena said. Yes, the audit that found my name in the addendum. Was it routine? He held her gaze.
No, you were looking.
I was looking. Why? Because I watched Adrian manage the run-up to this engagement the same way he manages acquisition targets, Nathaniel said. And I wanted to know if I was wrong. Were you? I hoped I was. Elena stood up. She moved to the window and looked out at the street, a quiet block on the Upper West Side, people walking dogs, a woman pushing a stroller, the ordinary, unremarkable motion of a city that did not care about any of this. I'm going to need everything, she said, not turning around. Every document you have that relates to Whitmore. Every piece of the audit. Every communication between Adrian and the board that you have access to. That's a significant amount of material. I know. Some of it implicates the company directly. I know that too, she turned around. Nathaniel, I was your son's fiancé for 14 months. My name is in a $400 million acquisition agreement in a clause I never signed. I am not in a position to protect the company's reputation. I am in a position to protect mine. He looked at her for a long moment. Fair, he said. I'll need it all. I'll have it to your attorney by end of business today. Elena nodded. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she hadn't allowed herself to before, because before he was Adrian's father, and therefore someone she kept at a careful and necessary distance, and now he was something harder to categorize. He was a man who had done something costly on her behalf, and she wasn't sure yet whether that made him trustworthy or just useful, and she was self-aware enough to know that she couldn't trust her own judgment on that question right now. Thank you, she said. For last night, he stood. Don't thank me. I waited 2 months longer than I should have. You still did it. Late is not the same as right, he said. Don't let me off the hook for the timing. She almost smiled. You're harder on yourself than I expected. Most people are harder on themselves than anyone expects, he said. They just don't usually say it out loud. He left. Asina stood in the middle of Diane's living room for a long moment after the door closed, and then she picked up her phone and called Carol and said, Get ready. The material is coming by end of day. Carol didn't ask where it was coming from. She just said, I'll clear the afternoon. The documents arrived at 4:30. Elenis was still at Diane's, still working through the timeline on the legal pad when her phone buzzed with Carol's text. Got it. Calling you in an hour. She had 40 minutes. She spent 15 of them in the bathroom, standing under the hottest shower she could manage, letting the water hit the back of her neck, and she ran through everything she'd know, and everything she suspected, and she tried to locate somewhere in herself the person she had been before Adrian, the person who trusted her own instincts without running them through 14 months of second-guessing. She was still in there. She could feel her. She just had a lot of debris to clear first. Carol called at 5:17. Okay, Carol said. The good news is your exposure is defensible. You have no signatures, no documented communications, no meeting minutes that place you in any substantive Whitmore discussion. Whoever drafted the addendum was counting on the credential listing being buried deep enough that no one would notice until the deal closed. And the bad news? The acquisition structure has at least 2 elements that are going to attract federal attention when this surfaces. And based on the timeline in these documents, this is going to surface very soon. Someone has already filed a preliminary inquiry with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was submitted 6 days ago. Elena sat down. Who filed it? Carol was quiet for exactly 1 second too long. Carol, the inquiry was filed anonymously, Carol said carefully. But the documentation attached to it is very specific. Specific enough that whoever filed it had access to internal Vail Company communications. Elena's mind went very still. Nathaniel, she said. I can't confirm that. You don't have to. Elena pressed her free hand flat against her knee. He filed it? He filed it 6 days ago, and then 3 days ago he found my name in the addendum, and then he came to that party last night. Elena, he already started the process, Elena said. Not angry. Not yet. Just running the numbers. The way she always ran the numbers. He was already burning the acquisition down before he told me about it. That could mean several things. It could mean he was protecting the company from his son independent of me. It could mean he wanted to time the disclosure to maximum effect. It could mean both. She paused. Or it could mean he's a decent man who started doing the right thing and then found out it was also going to destroy his daughter-in-law's career and decided to warn her. All of those are possible, Carol said. Which do you think? I think a man who files an SEC inquiry against his own son and then drives to your location the next morning to personally deliver a warning is not operating on a simple motive. No, Elena agreed. He's not. What do you want to do? What did she want to do? She thought about the legal pad. She thought about the shower. She thought about Nathaniel sitting in Diane's living room and saying, late is not the same as right. Don't let me off the hook, for the timing in the voice of a man who had clearly spent time constructing that sentence before he delivered it. She thought about Adrian's texts, about the word please, about the way he'd looked at her in the ballroom when the composure finally cracked that flicker of fear she'd clocked and filed away. She thought about the first time she'd felt afraid in this relationship and how she'd talked herself out of it, and then the second time and the third, each time finding a new explanation that was technically plausible and deeply insufficient. She thought about 11 pages of a yellow legal pad and the pattern that had emerged from them. I want to protect my career, she said. I want my name off that acquisition. And I want to cooperate with whatever federal process is already in motion, because I was used without my consent, and I'm not going to carry that quietly. Okay, Carol said. Then that's what we do. And Carol, I need you to find out definitively whether Nathaniel Vale filed that inquiry. Why? Because it matters, Elena said. Whether he did it to protect the company or to protect me or to protect himself, it matters. I need to know who this man actually is before I decide how much to trust him. Understood. Get me the answer. I'll try. Elena hung up and sat in the quiet of Diane's apartment and thought about the strange geometry of a situation where the most honest person in the room might also have the most complicated reasons for being honest. She was still sitting there when her phone rang again. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered, Ms. Marlowe. A woman's voice, professional, measured. My name is Sandra Okafor. I'm a senior investigator with the SEC's Division of Enforcement. I understand you may have some familiarity with the Whitmore Capital acquisition. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. She thought, this is it. This is the moment where the situation stops being something she can manage from Diane's apartment on a yellow legal pad and becomes something that is happening to her, whether she manages it or not. She thought about Carol's instructions. Don't respond to anything in writing without running it by me first. This wasn't in writing. I have an attorney, Elena said. Carol Brandt, you should contact her directly. Of course, Okafor said smoothly. We'll reach out. I just want you to know, Miss Marlowe, and you can share this with your attorney, that at this stage, you are not a target. We're trying to understand the structure of the acquisition and the roles of the individuals involved. My attorney will be in contact, absolutely. One more thing. Miss Okafor, Elena kept her voice level. I'm going to stop you there. Whatever else you want to say it to Carol Brandt. A brief pause. Of course. Have a good evening, Ms. Marlowe. Elena ended the call. She sat completely still for 10 seconds. Then she called Carol. The SEC just called me directly, she said the moment Carol picked up. Carol's exhale was sharp and controlled. What did they say? That I'm not a target, that they want to understand the structure. I redirected them to you. Good. That was the right call. How did they get my personal number? I don't know, Carol said. But it tells us the inquiry has escalated faster than the timeline suggested. This is moving, Elena. Faster than even this morning. I know. Are you somewhere safe? I'm at Diane's. Stay there tonight. Don't go back to the penthouse. I wasn't planning to. I mean it. Don't go back for your things without telling me first. Adrian's legal team is going to start building their position, and being inside that space without documentation of what you removed could complicate things. I understand. Get some rest. She was about to say I'll try again and caught herself. I will, she said instead. Call me if anything changes. You'll be the first call. She set the phone down. Diane appeared in the doorway with 2 bowls of pasta and a look on her face that said she had heard enough through the apartment walls to know that rest was relative. Eat something, Diane said. Elena took the bowl. She ate mechanically, efficiently, the way she ate when she was working, not tasting, just fueling. Diane sat across from her and ate her own pasta and didn't ask questions, which was the right call, because Elena's answers would have been incomplete and her voice might not have held the way she needed it to. At 9:15, a text came from Adrian. Not a please this time. Not a request. You went to my father. After everything I've done for you, you went to him. I hope you understand what you've started. Elena read it twice. She thought about what Carol had said. Don't respond to anything in writing without running it by me first. She set the phone face down. She thought about the words, what you've started. As if Elena had started this. As if this had started anywhere other than the 4th addendum of an acquisition agreement where her name appeared without her knowledge or consent. As if the starting point was Elena's walk out of a ballroom instead of 14 months of a relationship that had been quietly and systematically dismantling her professional autonomy, one careful step at a time. What you've started. She picked the phone back up. She took a photograph of the text. She sent it to Carol with a single line, for the record. Then she set the phone face down again and finished her pasta and did not sleep. And at 11:47 at night, her phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't recognize, a number she would later trace to Marcus Webb, Adrian's oldest friend, the only person in Adrian's circle who had ever treated her like a real person. The text said only this: he knows about the SEC inquiry. He's calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. You need to be ready. Elena stared at the message for a long time. She thought what re meant. She thought about what ready meant. She thought about the difference between a man who had spent 14 months making her smaller and a man who had walked across a ballroom and said the thing nobody else was going to say. She thought about motives and patterns and the particular kind of trust that isn't given, but earned slowly through specific, observable, costly actions. She picked up the phone and called Nathaniel Vale. He answered on the second ring. "He knows," she said. "I know he knows," Nathaniel said. His voice was steady. Not surprised, the board meeting. 7:30 tomorrow morning, he said. 42nd Street. I'll be there. What's he going to say? A pause. Not hesitation, consideration. He's going to say that you manipulated me into turning against my own son, Nathaniel said. He's going to say I'm not competent to assess the situation clearly. He's going to try to have my executive authority suspended pending a board review. The words landed in the silence of Diane's apartment. Can he do that? He has enough proxies to call the vote, Nathaniel said. Whether he wins, it depends on how many board members he's been managing as carefully as he's been managing everything else. If he suspends your authority, then everything I've given your attorney becomes a contested asset, Nathaniel said. Yes, I know. You should have told me this was a possibility. Yes, he said, I should have. He didn't make an excuse. He didn't explain it away. He just agreed, flat and clean, the way a man agrees when he knows he's right and isn't going to waste time on performance. Elena pressed her free hand against her sternum, where the tension had been living since the ballroom. If I attend that meeting, she started. Don't, he said immediately. It's not your fight to have in that room. Not yet. Nathaniel, let me handle the board meeting, he said. Let your attorney handle the SEC, and trust me for one more day. The word trust sat in the air between them through the phone. She thought about everything Carol had said, about motives, about the SEC inquiry, about late not being the same as right. She thought about the pattern on 11 pages of a legal pad, the pattern of a man who had decided she was something to be managed. She thought about the difference between that and this. One more day, she said, thank you. Don't thank me, she said. Earn it. She heard him exhale a small sound, almost imperceptible, the sound of a man who had been holding his breath and hadn't known it. I will, he said. She ended the call. She lay down on Diane's couch in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow morning and a board meeting she wouldn't be in, and a man she'd told to earn one more day of her trust, and she thought, either I'm making the most informed decision I've made in 14 months, or I'm making the same mistake in a different direction. She thought about Nathaniel's face in Diane's living room, the way he'd said I hoped I was wrong without needing her to tell him that was the right thing to feel. She thought about the word earn. She thought, we'll find out tomorrow which one of us is right. Then the city did its thing outside the window, a siren, a horn, someone's music, and Elena Marlowe closed her eyes and waited for morning, which was coming whether she was ready for it or not. This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. The board meeting started at 7:30. Elena knew this because Nathaniel had told her and because she was sitting in Carol Brandt's office on Lexington Avenue at 7:22, watching the minute hand on the wall clock like it owed her something, waiting for a phone that wasn't ringing yet. Carol's office was the kind of place that had been designed to communicate stability: dark wood, clean lines, law books that were actually read rather than decorative. Elena had been here before during contract negotiations for consulting work, back when her problems were the ordinary manageable kind. She sat across from Carol's desk, in a chair that was comfortable enough to make you forget you were scared, which was probably intentional, and she held a coffee she wasn't drinking and watched the clock. Carol was on her own phone, speaking quietly into the receiver, making notes on a legal pad with the efficient shorthand of someone who had been taking notes on other people's disasters for 25 years. She hung up at 7:31. SEC Division of Enforcement confirmed receipt of your attorney representation, Carol said. They won't contact you directly again. Anything goes through me. Good. They're also further along than I expected. The inquiry has been upgraded to a formal investigation. Carol set her pen down. That happened this morning. Before 7 a.m., Elena absorbed this. How does an inquiry get upgraded to an investigation before 7 in the morning? When the evidence submitted with the original inquiry is substantial enough to skip the preliminary assessment phase. Carol looked at her steadily. Whoever filed that initial inquiry didn't file a tip Elena. They filed a case, organized, documented, evidential. This wasn't someone raising a concern. This was someone handing the SEC a prosecution package. The room was very quiet, Nathaniel Elena said. The filing is anonymous. But yes, the level of internal documentation included the specificity of the financial trail. This came from someone with comprehensive access to Vail company records. And based on what you've told me about the audit, the timeline fits. Elena set her coffee down. She pressed both hands flat on her knees. He didn't just find my name in the addendum and decide to warn me. He'd already been building this for months. Looks that way. Against his own son. Yes, she thought about the night before. Let me handle the board meeting. Trust me for one more day. She thought about earn it. She thought about the way he'd said I hoped I was wrong, and now she was sitting here recalibrating what that sentence actually meant. Because hoping you're wrong about your son and systematically building a federal case against him were two things she was having trouble holding in the same frame. Is he a witness or a complainant, she asked. Both potentially. The filing positions him as a concerned internal party, but given the depth of the documentation, the investigators are going to want him in a formal interview. Soon. And me? You remain collateral. Your name in the addendum is the result of Adrian's actions, not yours. But that status holds only as long as the record is clean and your cooperation is clear. Carol paused. I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. How much do you trust Nathaniel Vail? Elena looked at the clock. 7:38. The board meeting had been running for 8 minutes. I trust that he's doing what he thinks is necessary, she said carefully. I don't know yet whether what he thinks is necessary and what's good for me are the same thing. That's a precise answer. It's the honest one. Carol nodded. Then here's what you need to know. If the board meeting this morning goes badly for Nathaniel, if Adrian successfully moves to suspend his executive authority, the documentation Nathaniel provided us could become subject to a corporate asset dispute. Adrian's legal team could argue it was proprietary company material improperly disclosed. They can't use that to suppress it. They can use it to complicate it. To slow down your defensive filing. To create enough procedural noise that the SEC timeline and your timelines stop running parallel. Carol picked up her pen again. We need to file your formal non-involvement declaration today. Before anything happens in that board meeting that changes the landscape. Then let's file it. I need 2 more hours to finalize the language. You have them. Carol's phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted the particular micro-adjustment of a lawyer who has just received information she wasn't expecting. Excuse me 1 minute, Carol said. She stepped out. Essena sat alone in the office and looked at the law books and thought about patterns. She thought about the pattern on 11 pages of a yellow legal pad, the incremental, patient, careful pattern of a man who controlled information. She thought about the fact that Nathaniel Vail had spent 40 years building one of the most successful financial empires in Manhattan and had done it from nothing, which meant he understood information and leverage and timing at a level that most people never reached. She thought, he is not a simple man acting on simple motives. She thought, neither are you. Carol came back in. She sat down. She put both hands on the desk. That was Marcus Webb, she said. Lena went still. Why is Marcus Webb calling you? He's not your attorney's contact. He called my main line and told my assistant it was urgent and related to an active case. Carol looked at her directly. He says the board meeting has already ended. It started 9 minutes ago. Adrian called an emergency procedural vote the moment the meeting opened. Before Nathaniel could present anything, he had 8 proxy votes lined up. Nathaniel had 6. Carol paused. Nathaniel's executive authority has been suspended pending a board review. Effective immediately. The words arrived one at a time. Elena heard them in sequence. She thought, 1 more day. She thought we didn't get 1 more day. Marcus Webb also said something else, Carol continued. He said Adrian is calling a press conference this afternoon, 2 o'clock, and that the stated subject is, Carol glanced at her notepad, addressing false allegations against Vail Enterprises stemming from a personal dispute with a former romantic partner. Elena felt something shift in her chest, not surprise. Not devastation. Something colder and more functional than either of those, the specific internal recalibration of someone who has just discovered that the situation is worse than they calculated and needs to update their model immediately. He's going to go public, she said. It appears so. He's going to make this about me. He's going to try, Carol said. Which is why we are filing your declaration in the next 2 hours, not after. Elena stood up. She walked to the window. Lexington Avenue below the ordinary indifferent machinery of a city morning, yellow cabs and delivery trucks, and people moving through their day, without any knowledge that several floors above them, a woman was standing at a window recalculating everything. Can we file before 2 o'clock? She asked. If we move right now. Then move. Carol was already picking up her phone. Elena's own phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Nathaniel, she answered it, she said. Not a question. I'm sorry. His voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something she hadn't heard from him before, not defeat exactly, but the sound of a man confronting a scenario he had prepared for and still found harder than expected. I underestimated how many proxies he'd secured. Marcus Webb called my attorney. A beat of silence. Marcus stopped. He's trying to help you. He's been trying to help me since last night, Elena said. He's apparently better at it than either of us. Elena. Adrian is holding a press conference at 2 o'clock. Her voice was flat. Factual. She was not going to give Adrian Vale's tactics the dignity of her emotional reaction. Not on this phone call. Not right now. Are you aware? I found out 60 seconds ago. What does he have? I don't know yet. What could he have, Nathaniel? Specifically, what material does he have access to that could complicate my position? The pause was brief, but she felt it. He has access to internal communications from the last 14 months. Anything sent through company channels, email, messaging systems, document sharing. If you ever communicated with anyone at Vale Enterprises during the relationship. I communicated with your regulatory affairs director, Elena said. Once. At a dinner, verbally. Any follow-up? Adrian sent a follow-up email that CC'd me. I responded with 2 sentences confirming the meeting had occurred. That's in the system, yes. He'll use it to establish your voluntary connection to the Whitmore team, Nathaniel said. It's thin, but thin doesn't matter at a press conference. It just needs to sound like something. Elena breathed in through her nose. Your executive authority is suspended. Yes. The documents you gave my attorney are already with her. They were transmitted last night. Whatever Adrian's legal team argues about proprietary disclosure, the material is in your attorney's possession, and your use of it in your own defense is protected. He paused. I anticipated this possibility. She looked at the ceiling. Did you anticipate all of it? Not the proxy count, he said. I thought I had one more vote than I did. Someone I trusted changed their position overnight. Who? Tom Hessler, vice chair. Why did he change? A long pause this time, longer than the others. And in that pause, Elena felt the shape of something she didn't yet have words for, the sense of a piece of information approaching, the way you feel a change in air pressure before the weather actually shifts. Adrian gave him something, Nathaniel said. What did he give him? I don't know. But Hessler had been solid for 11 years. He doesn't move without a reason. And the reason Adrian was able to provide overnight, Nathaniel stopped. I need to find out what it is before 2 o'clock. Elena looked at the window. Looked at Carol, who was working rapidly at her desk, phone cradled between her ear and shoulder, pen moving across paper. There's something else, Nathaniel said. Something in his voice. The particular quality of a man about to say something he has been organizing himself to say and still finds difficult when the moment arrives. What? Elena said. The SEC investigator Sandra Okafor. She's requested an in-person meeting with me this morning. In the last 30 minutes, she called you. She came to the building. He paused. She's here, Elena? She's in the lobby. Elena turned away from the window. They're moving today, she said. Yes, before the press conference. It's possible they want to get my testimony on record before Adrian controls the public narrative. Another pause. I need to go down and speak with her. With or without my attorney present. Do not go without your attorney. My attorney is already en route. Nathaniel. She said his name with a weight she hadn't used before, a directness that surprised even her. Whatever you tell them everything. Don't protect the company. Don't protect the legacy. Tell them everything you know. A silence that lasted long enough to mean something. That's what I intend to do, he said quietly. Then go. She hung up. She stood in Carol's office and thought about the press conference and Sandra Okafor in a lobby and Tom Hessler changing his vote overnight for a reason nobody knew yet. And she thought, the day is already moving faster than we can manage it. She thought, that means we stop trying to manage it and start trying to survive it. Carol looked up from her desk. I need you to sit down and help me finalize 3 sections of this declaration. It'll take 45 minutes. Elena sat down. They worked. It took 50 minutes, not 45, and every one of those minutes had the particular texture of urgent, precise work, the kind that leaves no room for anything except the task in front of you, which was the only mercy the morning offered. They filed at 9:58 a.m. Carol sent the confirmation to Elena's phone, and Elena looked at the timestamp and thought, 4 hours and 2 minutes before Adrian's press conference. Her phone rang at 10:15. It was a number she didn't recognize, not the SEC, different area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. She answered. Marlowe, a man's voice. Careful. My name is David Park. I'm an attorney. I represent Thomas Hessler. Elena went absolutely still. Why is Thomas Hessler's attorney calling me? She said. Mr. Hessler asked me to reach out, Parks said. He wants you to know that what he did this morning, the vote was not made freely. Elena felt the air change. What does that mean? She said. It means, Parks said slowly, that my client was presented with material last night that left him no real choice. And he would like you to know the nature of that material before it becomes public. What material? A pause. Are you somewhere private? Park asked. Elena looked at Carol, who was watching her with the focused attention of a woman who had learned to read a conversation from one side. Yes, as Elena said. Adrian Vale presented my client with a document last night, Park said. A private financial agreement, dated 8 months ago. It shows a transfer of consulting fees, a significant sum from a Vale Enterprises subsidiary account to a personal account in your name. Elena heard this. She heard it with the particular quality of hearing something that is both shocking and instantly, viscerally recognizable, the sound of a trap closing around you from a direction you hadn't been watching. That document is fabricated, she said. Her voice was absolutely level. My client believes it may be, Park said. He's not certain. Adrian presented it with what appeared to be bank verification and a counter-signature from the company's CFO. The CFO signed a fabricated document, or the CFO signed something he was told was a legitimate retroactive consulting agreement and didn't examine it closely enough to understand what it was being used for. Park paused. Miss Marlowe, my client is telling you this because he knows that if this document surfaces publicly at a press conference, for instance, you will be in a position where you're defending yourself against something that has the appearance of official financial documentation. Elena thought, Adrian has spent 14 months learning exactly which tools she didn't have access to and building the ones she couldn't see. She thought, he didn't start this when she left the ballroom. He started this before they were ever engaged. Why is your client telling me this? She asked. The question was flat, precise. She needed the motive the same way she needed oxygen immediately, before she could do anything else. Because my client has a daughter, Park said quietly. And he made a bad decision this morning in a moment of fear, and he knows it, and he would like to do something that costs him rather than something that costs someone else. The office was very quiet. What does he want to do? Elena asked. He wants to submit a sworn affidavit to the SEC stating that he was coerced into this morning's vote and describing the circumstances under which the document was presented to him, Park said. And he's prepared to provide the original copy of the document Adrian gave him, which may carry fingerprints, metadata, or forensic markers that establish when it was actually created. Elena pressed her thumb hard into the edge of Carol's desk. She looked at Carol. Carol was already reaching for her pen. Tell your client, Elena said, to do it now, today. Before 2 o'clock. He understands that. Tell him I won't forget that he made the right call when he didn't have to. A beat. I'll tell him, Park said. Good luck, Ms. Marlowe, she ended the call. She set the phone on the desk. Carol said, talk to me. Elena talked. Carol's pen didn't stop moving for the next 8 minutes. When Elena finished, Carol set the pen down and looked at her with the particular expression of a lawyer who has just had a case change shape in a direction that is simultaneously better and significantly more dangerous. He fabricated financial documentation, Carol said. The CFO signature, apparently. That's not just civil liability. That's criminal, I know. It also means he planned this before last night. Before the ballroom. This was a contingency, something he built in advance in case the engagement fell apart. Or in case I found out about the addendum, Elena said. A preemptive weapon. If I came after him with the Whitmore exposure, he'd come back with a fabricated financial record showing I'd been paid off all along. Carol was quiet for a moment. He was always going to use this. Yes, he may still use it today, even knowing Hessler has talked. He might not know Hessler has talked. No, Carol said. He might not. Elena stood up. She walked back to the window. The morning outside had not changed. Lexington Avenue was still doing its ordinary work, indifferent and continuous. She thought about 14 months. She thought about the pattern on the legal pad. She thought about the way Adrian had told 300 people he'd tested her and considered this a declaration of love. She thought about a man who had built a fabricated financial document as a contingency plan before they were ever engaged. She thought, I was never the person he was in a relationship with. I was an element he was managing, from the beginning. She thought, that means I never really knew what the relationship was. And underneath that, underneath the cold, functional recalibration and the legal maneuvering and the morning's escalating architecture of consequences, something cracked open that was not professional and not strategic and not manageable. It was grief, not for Adrian. She had no grief for Adrian. For the 14 months she had spent inside something she'd thought was real. For the version of herself that had talked herself out of her own instincts, not once, but repeatedly, methodically, as carefully as Adrian had managed everything else. For the woman she'd been before this relationship who had trusted herself, and the woman she'd become inside it, who had learned to doubt that trust. She stood at the window and let herself feel that for exactly 60 seconds. Then she turned around. What do we need to do before 2 o'clock, she said. Carol pulled the notepad toward her. 3 things. First, I need to contact the SEC and flag the fabricated document before Adrian's legal team can present it anywhere officially. Second, we need Hessler's affidavit on record as fast as Park can produce it. Third, Carol paused. What? I need you to make a decision about Nathaniel Vale. Elena waited. He's in an SEC interview right now, Carol said. His executive authority is suspended. His son is about to hold a press conference that will almost certainly include material designed to implicate you. And Nathaniel is the most credible witness to Adrian's conduct, but only if he testifies fully and without reservation. Carol looked at her steadily. If there's anything between you and Nathaniel that could complicate the picture, any perception of personal involvement, any narrative Adrian can use to suggest you and Nathaniel conspired, it needs to be addressed now, not later. Elena thought about Diane's living room. About a man who had said, don't let me off the hook for the timing, and meant it. About trust me one more day and the board meeting that had ended 9 minutes after it began. There's nothing to address, she said. There's no personal involvement. There doesn't need to be actual involvement, Carol said carefully. There needs to be a plausible narrative. Adrian told his board you manipulated Nathaniel into turning against his own son. If he says the same thing publicly, then we address it publicly, Elena said. With the facts, with the documents, with Hessler's affidavit and the forensic evidence on the fabricated record. She held Carol's gaze. I am not going to manage my relationship with Nathaniel Vale based on how it looks in Adrian's version of events. I am going to manage it based on what it actually is. Which is, Elena thought about this for a moment. Really thought about it, not the version she'd say in a legal context, not the version she'd say to Diane, but the actual honest version that she owed herself. A man who told me the truth when lying would have been easier, she said. That's what it is, nothing more than that and nothing less. Carol held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Then let's go to work. They worked. For the next 3 hours, Carol's office became the operational center of something that felt less like legal preparation and more like controlled emergency response calls going out, documents being transmitted, Park's assistant sending over a preliminary draft of Hessler's affidavit, Carol's paralegal running between rooms with printouts, Alina at the corner of the desk with her own laptop pulling every email chain, every calendar entry, every documented professional interaction that could establish the timeline of her non-involvement in Whitmore. At 12:47, Nathaniel texted, interview concluded. Full testimony given. My attorney says the investigators were thorough. It lasted 3 hours. Elena texted back, Hessler has talked. His attorney is filing an affidavit about the fabricated financial record. The response took 90 seconds. What fabricated financial record? She called him instead of texting. She told him what Park had described the document, The transfer amounts, the CFO's signature, the way it had been used to coerce Hessler's vote. On the other end of the line, she heard Nathaniel Vale go very quiet. Not the controlled quiet she'd heard from him before. Something different. Something that had a texture to it, the specific silence of a man absorbing information that has reached past his professional defenses and landed somewhere personal. He built that before the engagement ended, Nathaniel said. Yes. He was planning for the possibility that you'd fight back. Yes, another silence. Elena, I need to tell you something. She waited. The CFO's name is Richard Farwell, Nathaniel said. Richard Farwell has been with the company for 9 years. I hired him. He and we've had a professional relationship that I considered a strong one. Okay, if Adrian used him to countersign a fabricated document, Farwell either didn't know what he was signing or he made a deliberate choice. Or Adrian forged his signature too. Possibly. Nathaniel's voice had gone somewhere careful. Precise. The voice of a man doing arithmetic. I need to speak with Farwell before 2 o'clock. Is that wise? If Farwell is complicit, I need to know now. Not from a federal investigator, not from a press conference. His voice was steady but tight underneath. I need to know it from him directly so that I understand the full scope of what my son built inside my company while I was. He stopped. She heard what he didn't finish. While I wasn't paying close enough attention. While he was doing the thing he'd told her, he'd spent 40 years building an empire while I was inside it. Made decisions he wasn't closely enough to catch. Be careful, she said. I will. And Nathaniel, she stopped. Started again. If Farwell tells you something that changes what you testified to this morning. It won't change what I testified to, he said. What I told the investigators is the truth. Nothing Farwell says will change the truth. I know, she said. I meant if it changes what you know about the company. About what Adrian built. Be ready for it to be worse than what you already know. A pause. I'm already braced for that, he said quietly. Okay, I'll call you after I speak with Farwell. I'll be here. She ended the call. At 1:38, 22 minutes before the press conference, Carol's phone rang. Carol answered it. She listened for 45 seconds without speaking. Then she said thank you. Send it immediately. She hung up. She looked at Elena. Forensics came back on the document Hessler submitted, Carol said. The metadata on the fabricated financial record shows it was created 11 months ago. Before the SEC inquiry. Before the board meeting. Before the engagement party. She paused. 8 months ago, it was modified. Someone updated the transfer amounts and the account details. The original version had different numbers. Elena looked at her. It was built in 2 stages, yes. The original version 11 months ago used a different account number. When the modification was made 8 months ago, the account number was updated to match an account that Carol looked at her notes, was opened in your name 6 weeks after that. Elena heard this and understood it immediately, the full shape of it, the complete architecture of what Adrian had constructed. He opened an account in my name, she said, it appears so. Using enough of your personal information to establish it, without requiring your direct presence. Carol's voice was even, professional, deliberately stripped of the reaction she was clearly managing. The account received 1 wire transfer 8 months ago. A small amount enough to establish the record, not enough to trigger automatic reporting. He created the evidence before he needed it, Elena said. He created the infrastructure, Carol said. The account, the document, the CFO signature. He built a complete false financial relationship between you and the company. So that if you ever became a problem, if you ever fought back, he had something that looked like proof you were compromised from the beginning. The room was very quiet. Elena sat at the corner of Carol's desk and looked at her own hands, flat on the surface, absolutely still. She thought about 14 months. She thought about the first time she'd felt afraid. She thought about how she'd explained it away. She thought he was doing this while I was explaining it away. She thought he was building this while I was telling myself I was being unfair to him. She thought I spent 14 months managing my own doubt about a man who was simultaneously constructing a mechanism to destroy me if I ever stopped managing it. She felt something that was not grief this time. Not the grief from earlier, the clean, honest grief for lost time and lost self-trust. This was something colder, something that had no interest in being managed. What do we do? She said. We send everything to the SEC right now, Carol said. The metadata analysis, the account records, the timeline. And we do something else. What? We contact the press. Elena looked up, not to give a statement, Carol said. Not to compete with his press conference. We contact two journalists people I know, people with sources inside the SEC, and we make sure they know that a federal investigation is active and that documentary evidence of financial fraud and fabricated records is in the hands of investigators before Adrian Vale stands in front of a camera. You want to kill the narrative before he launches it. I want to make sure anyone in that press conference room has already received a tip that there's a different story. One with federal documentation behind it. Elena looked at her attorney. She thought about all the ways she had been careful. All the ways careful had kept her inside something she should have walked away from. She thought about the moment in the elevator, the relief, the lightness, and how far away that felt now. She thought, careful got me here. She thought, something else is going to have to get me out. Do it, she said. Carol picked up the phone. Elena picked up her own phone and saw a text from Nathaniel sent 4 minutes ago while she'd been sitting with the full weight of what Carol had just told her. The text said Farwell didn't sign it. His signature is forged. He found out this morning and he's been trying to reach Adrian. He came to me instead. Elena stared at the screen. She thought Adrian forged his own CFO's signature on a fabricated financial record designed to frame his fiancée. She thought this is not a man who got desperate when the relationship fell apart. She thought this is a man who was prepared to do this before the relationship fell apart, which means the relationship was never what she thought it was, which means she has been living inside a construction, and the construction is collapsing, and the only question that remains is whether she is going to be buried in the rubble or whether she is going to walk out of it on her own terms. She typed back to Nathaniel, Farwell needs to go to the SEC today. Right now. Before 2 o'clock, his response was immediate. He's already in the car. She set the phone down. She looked at Carol, still on her own phone, methodical and precise, doing the work that needed doing. She looked at the clock on the wall, 1:44. 16 minutes. She thought about Adrian Vale standing in front of cameras in 16 minutes, holding fabricated documents with a forged signature, preparing to reframe her as the villain of a story she'd spent 14 months surviving. She thought about everything she had built, everything she had earned, everything she had explained away and talked herself out of and given the benefit of the doubt until the doubt was the only thing left. She thought, not this time. She thought, whatever you bring to that room in 16 minutes, I have already been to the CC. I have already filed my declaration. I have already put Hessler's affidavit and Farwell's testimony and the metadata on your fabricated document in the hands of people who are paid to follow the evidence wherever it leads. She thought, you built a trap and I have spent the last 14 hours dismantling it from the inside out. She thought, and Nathaniel Vale is sitting somewhere in this city preparing to testify against his own son, which is the most costly thing one person can do for another. And I don't know yet what to do with that. And I don't need to know right now. Right now, she needed to get through the next 16 minutes. Then the next hour. Then whatever came after the press conference, whatever Adrian said, whatever cards he thought he still had, whatever narrative he launched into the Manhattan media ecosystem, with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for anything he had ever done. She thought, you have never met a version of me that has nothing left to protect. Her phone buzzed. Carol, wrapping up her call, looked over. Ready? Elena looked at the clock. 1:47. 13 minutes. Yes, she said. And she meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything in a very long time. Not performed confidence, not managed composure, not the carefully calibrated in presentation as of a woman who had learned to make herself small enough to dive in a space that was always going to be too small. Just ready. Whatever was coming, she was ready for it. This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. Adrian's press conference started 4 minutes late. Elena watched it on Carol's laptop, the live stream running in a small window in the corner of the screen while Carol worked the phones on the other side of the desk. The feed was shaky at first, some technical issue with the venue's connection, and then it stabilized, and there he was. He looked good. That was the first thing she registered, and she registered it the way you register a threat clinically, without sentiment. Adrian Vale looked rested and composed and appropriately grave, standing at a podium with the Vale Enterprises logo behind him and 3 attorneys flanking him at a respectful distance. And he looked like a man who had been wronged and had chosen the dignified path of addressing it publicly. He was very good at this. She had always known he was good at this. "I'll keep this brief," Adrian said into the cameras. Over the past 48 hours, a series of false allegations have been made against Vale Enterprises and against me personally, originating from individuals with a direct financial interest in disrupting our ongoing acquisition work. I'm here to set the record straight. Carol appeared in the doorway. She'd been on a call in the next room. She crossed to the desk and watched the screen. "He's going to use the document," Carol said quietly. "I know. Our material is already with Okafor's team." "Whatever he says, I know, Carol." On the screen, Adrian reached to the side of the podium and picked up a document. A single sheet. He held it with the practiced ease of a man who had rehearsed this gesture. "This," he said, "is a record of a consulting fee transfer made 8 months ago from a Vale subsidiary account to a personal account belonging to Elena Marlowe. Miss Marlowe's not my fiancée at the time this transfer was made. She was a paid consultant operating under a private agreement." He set the document on the podium. "The allegations she has since made against this company and against me are the actions of an individual attempting to preempt the disclosure of a financial relationship she chose not to make public." The room behind the cameras went very quiet. Elena watched Adrian's face. The controlled gravity of it. The careful, practiced performance of a man telling a lie he had spent 11 months building into something that looked exactly like the truth. She felt her jaw tighten. She felt her hands go flat on the edge of the desk. She felt, underneath the cold functional anger, something she recognized from the ballroom, the same sensation, the same specific internal shift of a woman who has been told a story about herself that is wrong, and who knows it is wrong, and who is done with the particular exhaustion of managing other people's comfort with the truth. Her phone buzzed. "Nathaniel Farwell is with the investigators now. He submitted a written statement. My attorney says Okafor's team has the forensic metadata. They have everything." She typed back, "How long before they can act on it?" 3 seconds. They're already acting on it. She looked up at Carol. "The investigators are moving. I know." Carol held up her own phone, a text visible on the screen. "Okafor's office just notified me that they've issued a formal request to Adrian's legal team for the original document he's currently displaying at the press conference." He doesn't know. He's about to find out. On the screen, a reporter had raised her hand. Adrian nodded at her. "Can you confirm," the reporter said, "whether the SEC has opened a formal investigation into Vale Enterprises?" A beat. One beat barely perceptible. Just long enough for Elena to see it and know exactly what it meant. "I'm not aware of any formal investigation," Adrian said smoothly. The reporter held his gaze. "We've received information suggesting a formal investigation was opened this morning. Can you confirm or deny that?" "I'm not aware." "We've also received information suggesting that the document you just displayed may be the subject of a forensic review." The reporter's voice was measured, professional, delivering information rather than performing drama. "Do you have any comment on that?" Adrian's left hand resting on the podium moved. Just slightly. A small, involuntary adjustment. The kind of physical tell you only catch if you've been watching someone long enough to know their baseline. Elena had been watching Adrian Vale for 14 months. She caught it. "The document is authentic," Adrian said. His voice had not changed. His expression had not changed. "I have no further comment on speculative reports." He wrapped the press conference up 2 minutes later. Shorter than planned, she could see the shape of the original structure, the questions he'd expected and had prepared answers for, the controlled narrative arc that was supposed to run another 15 minutes, and now wasn't going to, because the room had shifted and he knew it had shifted, and he was too disciplined to stand at a podium when the ground was moving under him. He stepped away from the cameras. Carol's phone rang. She answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and said, "We'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up and looked at Elena. "Okafor wants us at the federal building. Now, they've issued a preservation order on all Vale Enterprises financial records, and they want your formal statement on the account opened in your name. Let's go." The cab ride took 12 minutes. Elena sat in the back with her hands in her lap and watched the city move past the windows and did not think about Adrian or the press conference or the fabricated document or the account opened in her name without her knowledge. She thought about the declaration filed that morning. She thought about Hessler's affidavit. She thought about Farwell in a federal building somewhere in this same city, telling investigators about a signature that wasn't his. She thought the architecture Adrian built is coming down. She thought the question is whether it comes down fast enough to matter. The federal building on Broadway was not designed to be intimidating. It was designed to be functional, and it achieved that with the particular gray efficiency of government architecture that communicated, without announcing, that things that happened here had consequences. Sandra Okafor met them in a conference room on the 14th floor. She was younger than Elena had expected from the phone call, mid-40s, maybe, with the kind of focused presence that came from years of following evidence through rooms where powerful people insisted the evidence was wrong. Ms. Marlowe. She extended a hand. Thank you for coming quickly. Of course, I want to be direct with you about where we are. Okafor sat across from her, a closed folder on the table. This morning's testimony from Nathaniel Vale, combined with the forensic analysis of the documents submitted by Thomas Hessler and the statement just given by Richard Farwell, has moved this investigation significantly forward. We now have documentary evidence of financial fraud, forgery of a corporate officer's signature, and the unauthorized opening of a financial account using a private individual's personal information. She looked at Elena steadily. That individual is you. Yes, Elena said. I want to be clear, you are not a target. You are a victim of the conduct we're investigating. But your testimony today matters because you can establish the timeline of your actual relationship, professional and personal, with Vale Enterprises and with Adrian Vale specifically. I understand. Can you walk me through, from the beginning, the first time Adrian Vale raised the subject of your professional credentials in connection with any Vale Enterprises business? Elena thought about 11 pages of a yellow legal pad. Yes, she said, I can. She talked for 40 minutes. Okafor's questions were precise, sequence-specific, never leading the questions of an investigator who already had the documents and needed the human timeline to confirm what the documents implied. Elena answered each one with the same specificity, building a record the way Carol had told her to. Locations, exact language where she could remember it, approximate language where she couldn't, clear delineation between what she'd known and what she hadn't. When she was done, Okafor closed the folder and looked at her for a moment. One more question, Okafor said, and you don't have to answer this one if your attorney advises against it. Carol, sitting beside Elena, said nothing. Go ahead, Elena said. Did you, at any point during your relationship with Adrian Vale, have reason to believe he was capable of the conduct we've described today? Elena thought about this. She thought about the first time she'd felt afraid, about the pattern on the legal pad, about the way he'd said please in a voice that meant something other than please, about 14 months of explaining things away. Yes, she said. I had reasons. I chose not to follow them far enough. Okafor looked at her with an expression that was neither judgment nor sympathy, but something more like recognition, the look of a woman who had sat across from a lot of tables and heard a lot of people describe the specific work of not knowing what you already know. Thank you, she said. That's all I need. They were outside by 12:47. Carol said, go somewhere and eat something. I'm not hungry. Elena, I know. She looked at the street. I know. I'll eat. I'll call you the moment anything changes. Elena nodded. She didn't go to Diane's. She walked south on Broadway, no particular destination, just moving. Because movement was the only thing that felt like something she was choosing, rather than something that was happening to her. The city did its usual work around her: foot traffic, food carts, a delivery guy on a bike cutting through the intersection, a couple arguing in front of a pharmacy in a language she didn't speak. Normal. Indifferent. Continuous. She walked 6 blocks before her phone rang. Nathaniel, where are you? He said. Broadway. Walking. Can you stop walking for a minute? She stopped. She moved to the side of the sidewalk against a building and let the foot traffic pass around her. What happened? She said. Adrian's attorneys just contacted my attorney, Nathaniel said. His voice was tighter than she'd heard it before, not panicked, but compressed, the way a voice sounds when the person is managing something large in a small internal space. He wants a meeting. Today. Private. No investigators. No attorneys. He's scared. Yes. Where does he want to meet? The company offices. 42nd Street. Elena looked down Broadway. She thought about the press conference, about the document, about the small involuntary movement of Adrian's hand on the podium when the reporter mentioned forensic review. He's trying to negotiate, she said. It sounds that way. He doesn't have anything left to negotiate with. He thinks he does. Nathaniel paused. He told my attorney he has additional material. Material that wasn't disclosed in the federal filing. Something moved through her. Not fear, she examined it and confirmed it was not fear. Something more like the recognition of a pattern completing itself. He's bluffing, she said. Probably. But I'd rather know for certain. You're going to meet him. I think I have to. Elena pressed her back against the building. Around her the city moved, a bus groaned past. Someone laughed loudly, somewhere close. I want to be there, she said. Silena. I know what you're going to say. It's not your... It is my fight, she said. It has been my fight since before I knew there was one. You don't get to manage this without me, Nathaniel. I'm done being managed. A long pause. 3 o'clock, he said. 42nd Street, 43rd floor. I'll be there. She put the phone in her pocket and started walking again, faster this time, with the particular focused momentum of someone who has located the next thing and is moving toward it. The Vail Enterprises building on 42nd Street was a 47-story glass structure that announced itself with the quiet confidence of money that had been around long enough to stop needing to shout. Elena had been in this building before twice. For dinners Adrian had brought her to, events she'd attended as his partner and moved through with the managed sociability she'd perfected over 14 months. She had never been in it like this. She arrived at 2:53. Nathaniel was in the lobby, his attorney beside him, a compact, gray-haired man named Ellsworth, who had the look of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had stopped finding it dramatic without ever stopping finding it important. Nathaniel looked at her when she walked in. He took in the set of her jaw, the steadiness, the fact that she had chosen to be here in a building that had been the backdrop of everything that was done to her. And something moved across his face that was not quite admiration, and not quite something else, something that stayed between those two things and didn't try to resolve itself. Reddy says, he may say things designed to destabilize you. I know, he's very good at it. I know that too. She looked at him. Are you ready? He held her gaze. I've been ready for longer than I wanted to be. They took the elevator up. The 43rd floor had been the executive level for the 40 years of Nathaniel Vail's tenure. His office was at the end of a long corridor, or had been, until this morning's board vote suspended his access. They walked past it. The nameplate was still on the door. No one had moved it yet. Nathaniel looked at it for exactly 1 second. Kept walking. Adrian was in the main conference room. He was alone, which was either a deliberate choice or an indication that his attorney had recommended against being present for whatever he was planning to say. He was standing at the window when they came in, not sitting at the table, standing, looking out at the city with his hands in his pockets, and his jacket still on. And when he heard them enter, he turned around and looked at the two of them together, and something passed across his face. It was fast. She almost missed it. But she'd been watching Adrian Vail's face for 14 months, and she caught it, a flash of something that was not anger and not calculation, but something rawer than either. Something that sat beneath both of those and had been sitting there all along, driving them. Fear, not of the SEC, not of the investigation. Fear of the two of them standing in the same room aligned, looking at him without flinching. He recovered in under a second. The controlled exterior came back like a shutter closing. He gestured at the chairs around the conference table. Sit, he said. Nobody sat. He looked at Elena. I didn't expect you. I know. This conversation was intended to be between you and your father, she said. I understand. I'm here anyway. A muscle moved in his jaw. He looked at Nathaniel. You brought her. She came, Nathaniel said. There's a difference. Is there not a question? Yes, Nathaniel said. There is. Sit down, Adrian. Adrian looked at his father for a long moment. Something moved between them, old and complicated, and carrying the weight of a relationship that had been built on a particular set of assumptions about power and succession, and what it meant to be a Vail, assumptions that had been fracturing for days, and were now, in this room, fully broken. Adrian, Nathaniel sat. Asina sat across from Adrian, and kept her hands on the table, flat, visible, because she had learned that the most unsettling thing you could do in a room with someone who was trying to read your fear was to give them nothing to read. I want to make a proposal, Adrian said. I'm listening, Nathaniel said. I'll withdraw the public allegations. Retract the press conference statement. Sign a document acknowledging the consulting agreement record was inaccurate. He paused. In exchange for a managed resolution to the Whitmore situation. A restructuring that keeps the acquisition intact, limits the company's federal exposure, and maintains the Vail name professionally. Silence. Elena heard the traffic outside 43 floors below. Faint, continuous. You're asking me to negotiate with federal investigators, Nathaniel said. I'm asking you to manage the narrative. The narrative, Nathaniel said, is in the hands of the Division of Enforcement. It left our hands when you forged Richard Farwell's signature. Adrian's chin came up. I didn't forge, don't. Nathaniel's voice was quiet and absolute. Don't sit in this room and tell me you didn't. Farwell is giving his statement as we sit here. The forensic metadata on the document is in the investigator's hands. The account you opened in her name has been traced. He leaned forward slightly. I know what you did, all of it. Don't insult me by denying it. The room was very still. Adrian looked at his father with the expression of a man who had expected resistance and had not expected this specific quality of certainty, of someone who has already absorbed the worst of the truth and come out the other side of it with something harder than anger. Then he looked at Elena, and his voice changed. You did this, he said. It was quiet, almost conversational. The door-closing voice, except the door it was closing now, was not a room but a relationship, the final acknowledgement, delivered with the controlled precision of a man who had decided that the most effective remaining weapon was the truth told wrong. You came into my family, he said, and you turned my father against me. You made him choose you over his own son, over 40 years, over everything he built. His voice was even, controlled. The steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this and who is now delivering it the way he rehearsed it. I don't know if that's something you planned from the beginning or something that developed, and I don't know if you knew what you were doing or just did it because it was the easiest available option. But here we are. My father is testifying against me. My name is in a federal investigation, and you're sitting at this table like you belong here. Elena looked at him. She didn't answer immediately. She let the words sit in the room, and she looked at the man who had said them, really looked at him, the way you look at something once you stop trying to see what you wanted to see and just look at what's there. You opened a bank account in my name, she said, Elena. You forged your CFO's signature on a document designed to frame me. That's not. You attached my professional credentials to a $400 million acquisition without my knowledge or consent. You spent 11 months building a mechanism to destroy my career in case I ever stopped being convenient. She held his gaze. Her voice was level, not raised, not performing. Just level, the way it goes when you have moved past the point where the other person's reaction matters more than the truth. And you're sitting here telling me I turned your father against you. Something moved through Adrian's face, not the controlled exterior through it. Underneath the performance, underneath the calculation, something that was genuine and therefore paradoxically worse than either. He chose you, Adrian said, and this time the evenness was gone just slightly, just enough. He's never chosen anything over the company. Not my mother. Not me, not once in 61 years, and he chose you. The room was very quiet. Nathaniel looked at his son. When he spoke, his voice was lower than Elena had heard it. Not soft or lower, the register of something true being said without any cushioning around it. I didn't choose her over you, Nathaniel said. I chose the truth over the version of you that I'd been willing to accept. He stopped. Those are different things. I need you to hear that. I failed you, Nathaniel said. I know that. I spent 40 years teaching you that control was the same as protection. That information was the same as power. That the way you kept what mattered was to manage everything around it. He held his son's gaze. And you learned it perfectly. And you applied it to people the way I applied it to business. And I watched it happen, and I told myself it wasn't my doing. His jaw moved. It was my doing. I know that. Adrian stared at his father. The control exterior was down, fully down, and what was underneath it was not what Elena expected, not rage, not the cold calculation she had learned to read over 14 months. Underneath it was something younger and rawer and genuinely painful, something that had probably been there all along and had been covered by everything else, because covering it was the skill the Vail family had refined over 40 years. Then why, Adrian said, and his voice cracked, just slightly, just once. Are you sitting across the table from me with her? Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. In the silence, Elena made a decision. She stood up. Both men looked at her. I'm going to step out, she said. For 10 minutes. You two need to have a conversation that has nothing to do with me. Adrian blinked. It was the last thing he'd expected. Nathaniel looked at her with something she didn't try to name. 10 minutes, she said. She walked out. She stood in the corridor, outside the conference room, her back against the wall, and she breathed slow, deliberate, the way you breathe when the adrenaline is still running, and you need to convince your body that the emergency is not physical. She could hear, through the closed door, the low, indistinct sound of two voices. She couldn't make out words. She didn't try. She looked at the nameplate on Nathaniel's office door at the end of the hall. She thought about 40 years. She thought about what it cost to build something for 40 years, and then put it on the table because the alternative was letting it become the price of someone else's trust. She thought about the crack in Adrian's voice. She thought, he is not only a villain, he is also a person who was shaped by the same forces he used to shape others, and that doesn't excuse anything he did, and it doesn't make any of it less real, and it also doesn't make him only the thing he did. She thought, I can hold both of those things at once. She thought, maybe that's the difference between where I am now and where I was 14 months ago. Ellsworth, Nathaniel's attorney, peered from the elevator and raised an eyebrow at her in the corridor. Everything okay, he said. They needed a few minutes alone, she said. He looked at the conference room door. That's either very wise or very inadvisable. Probably both, she said. He almost smiled. 7 minutes passed. The conference room door opened. Nathaniel came out first. He looked at her, and something had shifted in his face, not resolution, not peace, something harder and more honest than either. The look of a man who had said something that needed saying and was standing in the aftermath of it, still on his feet. He stopped in front of her. He's not going to fight it, Nathaniel said quietly. He'll cooperate with the investigation. His attorney will negotiate the terms. Did he agree to that in there? He agreed that there's nothing left worth fighting for. Nathaniel paused. Which is not the same thing, but it's somewhere to start. Elena looked past him at the conference room door, which had not fully closed. Through the gap, she could see Adrian still sitting at the table, not looking at anything in particular, just sitting, with the particular stillness of someone who has run out of moves and has not yet worked out who they are without them. She looked back at Nathaniel. Are you all right? She said. He looked at her with the direct, unperforming attention she had come to recognize as his specific version of honesty. No, he said, but I will be. Okay, Elena. He said her name with a weight that was different from every other time he'd said it, not the professional courtesy of the early days, not the careful deliberateness of the last 48 hours, something that was just her name, said plainly, the way you say someone's name when you have no performance left and nothing remaining to hide behind. She looked at him. I know what this cost you, he said. All of it, not just the legal exposure. All of it. She held his gaze. I know what it cost you too. It's not the same. No, she agreed. It's not. They stood in the corridor of the 43rd floor of a building that had spent 40 years being a monument to control and legacy and the particular kind of power that confused ownership with love. And outside the windows the city moved through its ordinary afternoon. And inside the conference room Adrian Vale sat in the wreckage of everything he had built. And somewhere in a federal building across town, a formal investigation was generating documents that would define the next several years of multiple people's lives. What happens now, she said. Now the investigators do what investigators do, he said. And the board convenes again. And the company restructures around whatever the federal process determines. He paused. It will be a long time. Nothing resolves quickly. I know. And he stopped. And me, she said. He looked at her with the steadiness she had come to rely on, without ever quite meaning to the steadiness of someone who does not perform certainty, but maintains it, quietly, as a matter of character rather than image. I want to ask you something, he said. And you don't have to answer today. She waited. When this is over, when the legal process is done and your career is intact, and none of this is the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning. He stopped, gathered himself. I want to know if you'd be willing to have dinner with me. Elena looked at him. She thought about the ballroom. She thought about Diane's living room. She thought about a man who had walked across 300 people's collective judgment and said the thing that needed saying. She thought about Carol's voice. Don't assume his motives were purely on your behalf. She thought about Nathaniel's voice. Late is not the same as right, Don't let me off the hook for the timing. She thought about all the ways she had learned to mistrust her own instincts and all the ways she was learning, slowly one specific observable fact at a time, to trust them again. She thought, this is not the same. This is not anything like the same. She thought, but you don't have to know that today. Ask me again, she said, when this is over. He held her gaze for a long moment. I will, he said. She believed him. Down the corridor, the conference room door swung open fully, and Adrian's attorney, who had apparently arrived at some point, while Elena was standing in the hall, appeared in the doorway and said, "We need to make some calls." Nathaniel looked at his son, visible through the door. Something passed across his face that was not forgiveness and not severance, but something that lived in the difficult space between them, the particular pain of a parent who sees clearly, for the first time, the full shape of what they built and what it built in turn. He walked toward the conference room. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at Elena. "Don't go anywhere," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He went inside. Elena stood in the corridor of the 43rd floor and looked out the window at the end of the hall, a wide rectangle of Manhattan afternoon. The city doing its relentless, ordinary work 43 floors below, and she thought, tomorrow this building will still be here. The investigation will be moving. The legal process will be grinding forward with the impersonal momentum of federal machinery. Adrian will be somewhere in that machinery, and Nathaniel will be somewhere in it, and she will be somewhere in it, all of them working through the consequences of the last 14 months toward whatever exists, so on the other side. She thought, on the other side is the rest of my life. She thought, I don't know yet what it looks like. She thought, I know what it isn't. And that, after 14 months of not being able to say it, of talking herself out of it, of managing it and suppressing it and explaining it away, that was somewhere to... This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. The shareholder hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. It had been 6 weeks since the press conference, 6 weeks since Adrian had sat in that conference room on the 43rd floor and run out of moves. 6 weeks of federal process depositions, document reviews, the slow grinding machinery of an investigation that did not care about timelines or personal cost or the human debris it generated as it moved. Elena had gone back to work. Not for a firm, not yet. For herself, 3 clients she trusted, consulting work she could do from Diane's second bedroom, which had become her actual bedroom now that the temporary arrangement had quietly and without announcement become permanent. She had gone back to the penthouse twice, both times with Carol present and a moving company on standby, and she had taken what was hers and left the rest and had not looked at the building again after the second visit. She slept better than she had in 14 months. Not well, not yet, but better. Without the low-grade vigilance that she hadn't recognized as vigilance until it was gone, the constant background monitoring of mood and temperature, and the careful self-management of a woman living inside someone else's definition of herself. She woke up in Diane's second bedroom at 6:15 on a Thursday morning and lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling and thought, today is the day. The shareholder hearing had been called by Vail Enterprises' independent board members, the ones who hadn't been in Adrian's pocket, the ones who had watched the proxy vote and the subsequent disclosures with the particular dismay of people who had believed they were governing a sound institution and had discovered they were wrong. Its purpose was to address the structural issues in the Whitmore acquisition, the status of leadership following Nathaniel's suspension, and the company's obligations to its shareholders in light of the ongoing federal investigation. Adrian had been legally advised not to attend. He attended anyway. And I found out from Marcus Webb, who had been texting her updates with the quiet consistency of a man who had decided somewhere in the last 6 weeks that being on the right side of this was more important than being on the safe side. Marcus was still employed by Vail Enterprises. The company needed institutional memory, and Marcus had enough of it to matter, and he had become, without either of them quite naming it, something like an ally. He's here, Marcus texted at 8:47 a.m. His attorney tried to talk him out of it. He came anyway. Elena read the text in the back of a cab on the way to the hearing. She was not a shareholder. She had no full standing in the room. But Carol had arranged for her to be present as a documented victim of the fraud under investigation, which gave her access to the proceedings and the ability to provide testimony if called upon. She had been called upon. She arrived at the Meridian Hotel, the same building, a different floor, a smaller room than the gala ballroom, but carrying the same ambient architecture of money and consequence at 5 minutes to 9. Carol was already there, at a table near the side of the room. Nathaniel was there too, seated at the front with Ellsworth, looking like a man who had not slept and had decided that sleep was no longer the priority. He looked at her when she came in. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Contained, professional, the careful choreography of two people who had agreed, without discussing it explicitly, to be exactly what they needed to be in this room and nothing else. She sat beside Carol. At 9 o'clock, the board chair, a woman named Patricia Shen, who had the measured authority of someone who had chaired difficult meetings before and found them clarifying rather than draining, called the hearing to order. The room settled. Adrian was in the back row. Elena did not look at him. She was aware of him the way you are aware of a sound you're choosing not to focus on present, registered, not allowed to occupy the foreground. The first 2 hours were procedural, financial presentations, legal summaries. The company's outside counsel, Samuels, walked through the Whitmore acquisition structure with the methodical precision of someone ensuring that every person in the room understood exactly what had been built, how it had been built, and what it would cost to unwind it. The number was large. Not catastrophic, the company was not going to collapse.
But large enough to matter, large enough to redefine the trajectory of an institution that had spent 40 years building toward
A particular scale and was now going to spend the next several years rebuilding toward a smaller, more defensible one. Lena listened to all of it. At 11:15, Patricia Shen called a 15-minute recess. Elena stood and stretched her legs and walked to the window at the side of the room. Manhattan in November gray sky, bare trees in Bryant Park visible from this angle, the city doing its thing without comment. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps, breath. The specific sound of someone standing close enough to be deliberate. She turned around. Adrian, he looked different. 6 weeks had done something to him that she couldn't quite name, not diminished exactly, but reduced. It's this way a structure looks after. You've removed the scaffolding, and what remains is just the actual thing, without the apparatus that was making it look larger than it was. He was still handsome, still composed. But the composed exterior was sitting differently now, not armor, just clothes. Something that could come off. I'm not supposed to talk to you directly, he said. My attorney made that very clear. Then why are you standing here? Because my attorney isn't the one who has to live with this. She looked at him. She waited. He looked out the window. At the gray November sky, at Bryant Park, at the city that had been the backdrop of the life he'd built and was now the backdrop of its undoing. I want to say something, he said, and I'm not asking you to respond to it or accept it or do anything with it. I just need to say it. She said nothing. I knew what I was doing, he said. Not all of it, not the full scope, not every consequence. But I knew enough. I knew I was using your name without telling you. I told myself it was protective, that you'd benefit from the acquisition's success, and I'd explain it after the fact and you'd understand. He paused. That was a lie, I told myself, because the truth was too clear. What was the truth? He was quiet for a moment. That I didn't trust you enough to tell you. And that instead of examining why I didn't trust you, I decided to make it so you couldn't find out. Elena looked at his profile. At the jaw she had watched tighten 100 times when he was managing something. At the hands she had watched make 1,000 small controlled gestures designed to maintain authority while performing openness. You built an exit trap, she said, before we were engaged. Yes. You opened an account in my name. Yes. You were preparing to destroy my career if I became inconvenient. He didn't look away from the window. Yes. The word sat in the air. She thought she would feel something violent about hearing him confirm it. She had expected violence not physical, but emotional. The detonation of finally having the truth said plainly, instead of having to excavate it from beneath 14 months of careful construction. What she felt instead was quieter than that. Something that was almost tired. Not the exhaustion of the last 6 weeks, the specific deep tiredness of a person who has been carrying a question for a long time and has finally received the answer and can now at last set the question down. Why are you telling me this? She said. He turned and looked at her. And for once, the first time she could remember, Adrian Vale looked at her without managing what she would see. Because you deserve to hear it from me, he said. Not from an investigator's summary. not from a legal document. From me, he paused. And because I spent 14 months telling myself I was protecting you, and I need to stop lying about that. Even to myself, especially to myself. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. He blinked. Okay, I heard you, she said. I'm not going to tell you it's all right, it isn't. But I heard you. Something moved through his face. Not relief, something more complicated than relief. Something that didn't have a clean name. The expression of a man who had prepared for a reaction and received a different one, and wasn't sure what to do with the gap. My attorney is going to negotiate a plea arrangement, he said. I'm cooperating fully with the investigation, I know. Your name will be formally cleared in the documentation. Carol has already confirmed that process is underway. He nodded. He looked at the window again. Then he said quietly, he loves you. My father. I don't know if you know that. Elena was quiet. I've never seen him, Adrian stopped. Started again. He's never prioritized a person over the company. In 40 years once, not my mother, not me. He paused. He testified against me. You know what that cost him. Yes, she said, I know. He did it because it was right, Adrian said. And he did it because of you. Both of those things are true. She said nothing. I'm not saying that as an accusation, he said, and she heard that he meant it not the managed sincerity she'd learned to distrust, but something that carried the specific weight of a person saying something true at considerable cost to themselves. I'm saying it because it's the most honest thing I've seen him do in my entire life. And I grew up watching him. The recess ended. Patricia Shen's voice carried from across the room. We're resuming. Adrian looked at Elena one more time. Take care of yourself, he said. I have been, she said. For a while now. He walked back to his seat in the back row. She walked back to Carol. This second half of the hearing moved differently than the first. Where the morning had been procedural, the afternoon was personal testimony from board members about what they had known and when, from the company's general counsel about the internal reporting structure, from Marcus Webb about the communications he had observed and documented, and then from Nathaniel. He sat at the front of the room and answered Patricia Shen's questions with the same directness Elena had seen from the beginning. No performance, no strategic framing, just the facts as he knew them, including the facts about himself. What he had failed to see, what he had chosen not to examine. The ways the culture he had built inside the company had created the conditions for what Adrian had done. He did not protect himself. He did not minimize his own role in the failures that had led to this room. He also did not collapse under the weight of it. He sat with it the way you sit with something genuinely heavy, without trying to put it down before its time. Elena watched him and thought about what Adrian had said, that he's never prioritized a person over the company. Not once. Not in 40 years, she thought. People change. Not always. Not easily. Not without cost, she thought, but sometimes. After the testimony, Patricia Shen addressed the room with the measured finality of a board chair who had made her determinations and was now communicating them. The Whitmore acquisition would be unwound. The company would cooperate fully with the federal investigation. A new executive structure would be established during the transition period, overseen by a committee of independent board members. Nathaniel Vale's suspension would be reviewed in light of his full cooperation with both the board and federal investigators, a review that, based on the testimony heard today, was likely to result in a modified role rather than full reinstatement, given the structural changes the company required. And Vale Enterprises, going forward, would be a different and smaller institution than the one that had walked into this hearing. The room accepted this with the particular quiet of people absorbing a conclusion they had known was coming and are now experiencing as reality, rather than anticipation. Nathaniel sat very still through all of it. When the hearing concluded and the room began its slow dissolution, attorneys gathering papers, board members conferring in clusters, a photographer from a financial news outlet capturing the Elena stayed in her chair for a moment. Carol touched her arm. You did everything right. We did everything right, Elena said. Go home and rest. I will. Carol began gathering her files. Elena stood and picked up her coat and turned and found Nathaniel standing 3 feet away. He looked like a man who had just given something large away and was standing in the space where it used to be, taking inventory of what remained. How are you? She said. Lighter, he said. And then, with a quality in his voice she hadn't heard before, something almost like surprise, I didn't expect to feel lighter. What did you expect? I don't know. More like loss, I suppose. Less like he stopped. Look for the word. Less like I can breathe. She looked at him. She thought about everything that had happened in the 6 weeks since the 43rd floor. The careful distance they'd maintained appropriate, necessary, the distance of two people in the middle of a legal situation who were both smart enough not to create complications. The texts that were professional, the calls that were informational. The one evening when he'd called late, not about the case, just to ask how she was, and she'd told him honestly that she was tired and he'd said, "Me too," and they'd talked for 40 minutes about nothing consequential, and she'd hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. Afterward, not sure what to do with the warmth of it. "You asked me something," she said, "on the 43rd floor." He looked at her steadily. "I remember. You said to ask again when it was over." "Yes." "Is it over?" He thought about this seriously, the way he thought about things that deserved serious thought. "The legal process isn't over," he said. "That will take months. The company's restructuring will take longer." He paused. "But the part where we're in the middle of the storm, I think that part is over." "Then ask me again," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The room was still moving around them, people leaving, conversations wrapping up, the ordinary aftermath of a consequential event, and he stood in the middle of it and looked at her the way he had looked at her in the ballroom, in Diane's living room, in the corridor on the 43rd floor. The way he always looked at her, like he was actually seeing her, and like what he saw was something worth the cost of seeing clearly. "Lena," he said, "would you have dinner with me?" She thought about Carol's voice. "Don't assume motives are purely on your behalf." She thought about her own voice, the night she'd called him from Diane's apartment. "Earn it." She thought about everything he had done in the weeks since. The testimony, the board hearing, the decision, made quietly and without announcement, to restructure the company in a way that cost him personally, rather than protecting himself at institutional expense. The phone call about nothing, the way he said her name. She thought, "I have been watching this man's actions for 6 weeks. Specifically, carefully, with every skeptic's tool I possess." She thought, "I know what I see." "Yes," she said. He's exhaled. "Just slightly, just enough to be human." "Good," he said. They walked out of the Meridian Hotel together, not touching, not performing. Just two people walking through a lobby and out onto the street where the November air hit them and the city was doing its ordinary work. And nothing about the moment was cinematic except that it was real. He flagged a cab for her. She got in. Through the window she could see him standing on the sidewalk, hands in his coat pockets, watching the cab pull away. Not with any particular expression, just watching. She faced forward. She thought, "That's a man who tells the truth when lying would be easier." She thought, "That's somewhere to start." The months that followed were not simple. The federal investigation ran for 14 months. Adrian's plea arrangement was negotiated in the spring cooperation in exchange for a reduced charge, a significant financial penalty, and a 5-year bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. He accepted it without public drama, without the press conference counter-narrative he'd threatened, without any of the weapons he'd spent so long building. He moved out of Manhattan. Not far Connecticut, a quieter life, the beginning of something Elena didn't have access to and didn't need access to. What she heard through Marcus was that he was working. Not finance. Something smaller, something that involved using his hands. Marcus said this with a particular quality in his voice, not judgment, not satisfaction, just the tone of a man relaying information about someone he had known a long time and was watching find a different version of themselves at considerable personal cost. Elena met with Adrian once more, 6 months after the hearing. A coffee brief, arranged through attorneys, in a neutral location. It was for the formal execution of a document releasing her from any residual legal connection to the Whitmore acquisition, a formality, Carol had said, but one that required his signature in person. He signed it. He handed it back across the table without drama. They sat for 10 minutes afterward, which was not required and which neither of them had planned. "How's your father?" she said. He looked at the table. "Better than I expected," he said. "We talk, not often. But we talk." He paused. "It's different. I don't know what it is yet. But it's different. Different is somewhere to start," she said. He looked at her. "You're not what I thought you were," he said. "When I met you, I thought you were, I had a category for you. And you kept not fitting it, and I kept trying to make you fit." He stopped. I never let you just be what you actually were. No, she said. I'm sorry, he said. The words were plain, undecorated. No performance around them. She thought about 14 months. She thought about the legal pad. She thought about the account opened in her name, and the forged signature, and the fabricated document, and the way he'd looked at her in the ballroom. And she thought about the coffee in front of her, and the November light through the window in the life she was building, carefully, with her own hands, one decision at a time. I know, she said. I heard you. She meant it both times. She left the coffee shop and walked to the subway and went home. Home was no longer Diane's second bedroom. Home was an apartment on the Upper West Side, her own lease, her own furniture, her own space that smelled like her books and her coffee, and the particular quiet she had discovered she needed and had spent 14 months not allowing herself to have. She had rebuilt her consulting practice. Not at the scale she'd been before, deliberately smaller, more selective, the kind of work that required her judgment rather than her stamina. She had written a piece for a business publication about corporate due diligence and the hidden professional risks embedded in personal relationships with executives. She had not named anyone. She had not needed to. It was the most widely read thing she had ever published, and the emails she received in the weeks after its publication were from women she had never met, in industries she didn't work in, who said simply, I recognize myself in this. She had started slowly to trust her own instincts again. Not entirely, that was still work, the kind of work that didn't have a completion date. But she could feel the difference between her instincts and her fear, which for a long time she hadn't been able to do. She could walk into a room and read it without second-guessing the reading. She could say no to things that didn't serve her without spending 3 days afterward wondering if she'd been unfair. Small things, significant things. She and Nathaniel had dinner on a Friday evening in December at a restaurant in the West Village that was small and not designed to impress anyone his choice, which she noted. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the case was in a different room now, handled by attorneys and investigators, and the slow grind of legal process. They talked about other things. Her consulting work. A book he'd been reading. A neighborhood in Brooklyn he'd been thinking about. The strange recalibration of a life that had been organized around one thing for 40 years and was now being reorganized around different things. He was not easy company. He was not designed to be easy. He was direct and sometimes blunt, and he thought carefully before he spoke and occasionally said things that were true in ways that required her to think before she responded. He was not warm in the performed way she had learned to distrust. He was warm in the specific way, the way that showed up in the particular attention he paid when she was talking, the way he remembered things she'd said in previous conversations and returned to them without making it obvious that he'd remembered. She liked that about him. She liked more than that about him, which was something she examined with the careful honesty she was learning to practice on herself. They walked after dinner. South on Hudson Street, then east, no particular destination. The December cold requiring the kind of walking pace that generates warmth. He put his hand at the small of her back when they crossed a street not possessive, just present, the gesture of a man who was checking that she was there. She let it stay. She thought, this is nothing like before. She thought, that's the point. At the corner of Spring and Varick, they stopped. He looked at her. Thank you for tonight, he said. I had a good time. So did I, he paused. I want to say something, and it may be premature. Say it anyway. I'm not in a hurry, he said. I want you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm not moving it on my timeline. I spent 40 years moving things on my timeline. I'm done with that. She looked at him. She thought about I gave her everything she needed to walk away and still be comfortable. She thought about the difference between that and this, between a man who measured trust by whether you stayed and a man who was telling her plainly that he wasn't counting. I know, she said, I can tell. He held her gaze. I'm not going to pretend I don't have feelings about where this goes. I know that too. But I'm also not going to let those feelings become pressure. No, she said, you're not. She reached up and touched the lapel of his coat briefly. Just a moment, the kind of touch that is not romantic and not formal, but something that exists in the space between them, where they were still learning what that space was. He stood very still. Ask me again in the spring, she said. Ask you what in the spring? Whatever you want to ask me, she said. I'll be better at answering by then. He almost smiled. Better? Clearer, she said. I'm still clearing debris. I know, he said. Take the time. She stepped back. Good night, Nathaniel. Good night, Elena. She walked to the subway entrance on the corner. At the top of the stairs, she stopped and looked back. He was still standing on the corner, his hands in his coat pockets, watching her with that particular quality of attention, the steady, unhurried, genuine attention of a man who looked at things the way they actually were and did not try to arrange them into something more convenient. She thought, I spent 14 months with a man who tested me without telling me I was being tested. She thought, I am standing on a corner in December looking at a man who told me he has no timeline and meant it. She thought, I know the difference. She went down the stairs. Spring came, he asked. She answered. Not in a grand gesture, not a ballroom, not 300 witnesses, not a performance of certainty designed to cover the absence of it. He asked her on a Sunday morning at a farmer's market in Brooklyn, standing between a flower stand and a produce table, holding 2 cups of coffee because she'd asked him to get coffee while she looked at the tomatoes, and he came back with the coffee and looked at her in the November that was now April light, clear, direct, fully present, and said, I love you. I want you to know that. No conditions on it. She held her coffee. She looked at him. She thought about all the ways she had been told stories about herself that were wrong, and all the ways she had fought to know the difference between the stories and the truth, and all the ways that distinction had cost her and ultimately saved her. She thought about the version of herself who had walked into a cab on 54th Street with a ring off her finger and legal exposure she hadn't agreed to, and the version of herself standing here now, in the April light, holding coffee, knowing exactly who she was. She thought no conditions on it. She thought that's what it's supposed to sound like. I know, she said. He waited. I love you too, she said. I want you to know that's not something I say because of what you did for me. It's something I say because of who you are when there's nothing at stake. He looked at her with the direct, quiet attention she had come to know as his specific version of being moved. Okay, he said. She laughed. It surprised her the ease of it, the lightness. Okay, she said. I was going to say something more eloquent, he said. But okay covers it. They stood between the flower stand and the tomatoes in the April light, and the market moved around them ordinary, continuous, indifferent, and she thought, this is it. Not the ballroom, not the drama, not the moment where everything looks perfect. Just 2 people in a market in the spring with coffee, with nothing to hide. She had spent 14 months inside someone else's definition of herself, and she had spent the year after that rebuilding from the inside out the slow, honest, imperfect work of a woman learning to trust the only judgment she had ever actually owned. She was not finished. She would probably not finish. That was the part nobody told you about, that the work didn't have a completion date, that trust and clarity and the quiet confidence of a person who knows their own mind are things you practiced rather than things you achieve. But she was here, in the April light, holding coffee, next to a man who told her the truth when lying would have been easier, and that after everything was enough, that was more than enough. That was exactly what she had demanded in a ballroom the night she took the ring off her finger and put it on the table and said, in front of 300 people who would never forget it, I refuse to marry a man I can't trust. She had meant it then. She meant it still. The difference was that now she was standing in the proof of what happened when you held that line, when you refused to trade it away for comfort or safety or the particular seductive warmth of a life that asked you to be smaller than you actually were. You ended up in the April light, with coffee, with someone who earned it. That was the whole story. That was all of it, ND.